Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive this
Yeah,
time into something I think we've all felt at some point,
for sure.
that feeling of laziness. And you shared three sources that were really interesting. One that is like this practical guide for how to overcome laziness.
Yeah.
One that talks about tackling it in 2025,
Right.
and then one that's actually arguing that it might not even be real.
Yeah, that one really challenges some assumptions.
Yeah, it does. Where'd they go with that?
It's from a book called The Laziness Cure by Stephen C. Hayes. And instead of looking at laziness as this fixed trait,
Yeah.
he proposes that it's more like a symptom of something else.
So instead of beating ourselves up for being lazy, we should be trying to figure out what's causing it.
Exactly. It's about getting curious instead of judgmental.
Okay, I like that. So give me an example. Like how could someone be mislabeled as lazy when it's really something else going on? Well, he uses this really powerful example of someone who, maybe gets labeled as lazy, but really what's going on is they're carrying trauma from childhood, maybe, where any initiative was punished.
Wow.
So suddenly their lack of motivation seems less about choice and more about self-protection.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's true. You don't know what's going on with people sometimes. I mean, that reminds me of a time I had a colleague and I thought they were being lazy and turned out there was a family crisis I knew nothing about.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a big lesson learned for me that day to, not jump to conclusions.
Absolutely. I think it's so easy to do, though, right? We see the outward behavior,
Right.
but we don't see those internal struggles.
Right.
And those can vary wildly from person to person.
Right.
And so Hayes really emphasizes how crucial it is to remember that what works for one person might not work for another when it
Yeah.
comes to overcoming these feelings of laziness.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we're ditching the lazy label, then what are some of the things that might actually be making us feel stuck?
Well, both Overcoming Laziness in 2025 and How to Overcome Laziness lists some common culprits.
Right.
And lack of clear goals is a big one.
Right.
If you don't know what you're aiming for, it's hard to get motivated.
Yeah.
Feeling overwhelmed can also lead to just, paralysis. Like, have you ever just stared at a giant to-do list and just given up before even starting?
Oh, yeah, all the time. My brain just shuts down.
Right, exactly. And then, the 2025 guide specifically mentions something that I think is really relevant, which is how our tech-filled world
Yes.
can actually impact our motivation.
Tell me more about that. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like a double-edged sword, right?
Right.
On the one hand, we have all this incredible technology,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, we're constantly bombarded with instant gratification,
Mm-hmm.
social media streaming services, constant notifications, all designed to hook our attention. And it kind of creates this expectation of immediate rewards,
Right.
which makes sustained effort feel boring, kind of boring in comparison.
I can totally see that sometimes I'll like get lost down a social media rabbit hole for like hours and then I'll be like, wait, where did the day go?
Exactly. And it's not even just about distractions. It's the sheer volume of information and choices we face now,
Right.
which can lead to decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Our brains just get overloaded.
Yeah.
And so procrastination almost becomes this way of coping.
Oh, so we're almost wired for laziness in this environment.
Yeah, in a
Yeah.
way you could say that.
Wow. Okay. So how do we break free from these almost subconscious traps? How to overcome laziness. The article had some practical tips. So walk us through those.
Yeah, so they suggest 5 key strategies: finding your motivator,
Okay.
avoiding distractions, creating accountability, taking breaks, and setting reasonable goals. And these all seem, fairly straightforward on the surface, but there's real depth to them when you start to apply them, in the context of understanding your personal motivations.
So let's unpack that a little bit. What does it mean to find your motivator? It seems like more than just saying, I want to get in shape, you know?
Absolutely. It's about asking yourself why you want to achieve something.
Hmm.
Like, what's the deeper purpose behind that goal?
Okay.
Is it to improve your health? Is it to gain recognition? Or maybe is it to prove something to yourself?
Oh, interesting.
Once you tap into that deeper, why, it becomes a source of energy even when things get tough.
Okay, so it's not just about the goal itself, but the emotional force driving us towards it.
Exactly. It's about connecting with something meaningful
Right.
that helps us stay committed even when we face obstacles.
So how does accountability play into that?
Well, that's where the 2025 guide had some interesting points about how, we don't have to just rely on willpower.
Right.
We can actually leverage our social connections to help us.
Okay.
It highlights the power of community for overcoming those feelings of laziness. So joining groups,
Yeah.
finding an accountability partner, or even just sharing your goals with someone who's supportive can make a huge difference.
It's like having a built-in cheer squad
Exactly.
to help you stay on track.
It's tapping into that external motivation to kind of supplement our own.
Okay. That makes sense, especially when maybe our willpower is wavering. But how do we set ourselves up for success in the first place? I know I tend to get like overly ambitious with my goals and then I just end up overwhelmed.
Right.
So what does setting reasonable goals really look like?
That's where the 2025 guide suggests using a framework called SMART goals.
SMART goals.
Okay. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
I love a good acronym. Break that down for me.
So instead of having like a vague goal like get fit, a SMART goal would be something like I will exercise for 30 minutes 3 times a week for the next month.
Okay.
So it's specific. You know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's measurable. You can track your progress. It's achievable.
Yeah.
You're not setting yourself up for failure. It's relevant to your overall desire to, be healthier. And it's time-bound. You have a deadline that
Right.
you're working towards.
I can see how that structure would be really helpful to just stay focused and motivated. It takes the guesswork out
Exactly.
and gives you like a clear roadmap.
Yeah. And remember, it's about progress, not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
It's about taking those consistent steps, even if they're small, rather than trying to like make this huge leap and then getting discouraged when you don't reach it.
That's a good point.
And speaking of consistent progress, part of that is knowing when to take a break.
Oh, that's so important. I feel like I always forget that.
The How to Overcome Laziness article really emphasizes that.
I fall into that trap too of thinking I just need to push myself constantly
Yeah.
to get things done, but I know I've experienced burnout and it just makes me less productive in the long run.
It's counterintuitive, but stepping away from a task can actually boost our creativity and problem-solving abilities.
Okay.
Overcoming laziness in 2025 actually talks about this too, and how technology can actually be used to help us, encourage these healthy breaks.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. Let's talk tech solutions.
So the guide highlights all these different productivity apps that are designed to help us stay on track. There are apps for to-do lists, calendar reminders, time trackers, even apps that block distracting websites.
Oh, wow.
It specifically mentions Google Calendar Todoist and one called Focus at Will.
Focus at Will. I haven't heard of that one. What is that?
It uses music and soundscapes that are specifically designed to improve focus and concentration.
Oh, wow.
Some people find it really helpful for getting into that flow state, where work just feels effortless.
So it's like a personalized soundtrack for productivity.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
I like that.
Yeah.
But I've tried so many different productivity apps in the past, and I sometimes feel like I spend more time managing the apps than actually getting work done.
Yeah, the guide actually warns against that. They call it app overload,
App overload. I love it.
where we get so caught up in trying the latest tools that we lose sight of the actual work. It just becomes another form of procrastination.
Yes. I've so been there.
So it's about being intentional and selective. Instead of downloading every app that looks shiny and new, think about your specific needs and your workflow. Like, what are your biggest challenges when it comes to productivity? And what kind of tools would actually help you overcome those challenges?
So find the right tool for the job, not necessarily the perfect app.
Exactly. And remember, technology is just a tool,
Yeah.
right? It's up to us to use it effectively.
Right.
So it's about combining these tech tools with, those core strategies we talk about, like setting clear goals,
Right.
understanding your motivations, creating accountability.
So finding that balance between the tech and the human effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us back to, what Hayes was saying about individuality, right? What works for one person might not work for another. So it's about experimenting, finding what supports your unique way of working, and being willing to adapt as needed.
I love that. This is really making me think about laziness in a whole new light. It's not about being flawed. It's about understanding all these factors that are influencing our behavior.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about this topic, right? The more we learn about the brain, the more we realize that laziness isn't this like character flaw that some people have and others don't.
It's much more nuanced than that.
It's a really complex interplay of our biology, our environment, our experiences, and our mindset.
Right.
And the good news is all of those things are within our power to change.
Okay. That's good news.
We all have the potential to be productive and achieve our goals. It's just a matter of understanding ourselves, setting ourselves up for success, and being kind to ourselves along the way.
I love that. Being kind to ourselves. I think that's something I need to hear more often, especially when I'm feeling stuck.
Yeah,
It's a journey, not a destination.
exactly. There will be good days and bad days, but the key is to just keep learning and growing
Yeah.
and moving forward. And,
Mhm.
when you hit those inevitable bumps in the road, that's when it's time to get curious.
Curious about what?
Curious about what your body and mind are trying to tell you, that lazy feeling isn't something to judge or punish yourself for. It's a signal.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
A signal for what?
A signal to ask yourself some questions. Are you truly unmotivated, or are you burnt out? Do you need a break? Do you need to change the scenery?
Hmm.
Are your goals aligned with your values?
Okay.
By asking these questions, you can start to unravel the root cause of your inaction and find more effective solutions.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. It's not about beating ourselves up for being lazy,
Yeah.
but about using that feeling as an opportunity
Right.
to learn and grow.
Exactly. And once you start approaching it that way, the possibilities are endless.
I love that endless possibilities. This has been so eye-opening. You've given me a lot to think about today. But before we go off and revamp our to-do lists, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave our listener with?
I don't think it's about, becoming some hyper-productive machine.
Oh, good, because I was starting to get a little worried there.
No, no, not at all. It's more about finding that sustainable rhythm
Right.
that works for you.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is recognizing that rest is not the enemy of productivity.
Yeah.
It's essential for it.
I'm so guilty of trying to hustle harder and just pushing through, but I'm realizing that just leads to burnout in the end.
What's interesting is there's actually growing scientific evidence for the power of downtime.
Really?
Things like naps, daydreaming, even boredom can boost creativity and problem solving.
Okay, you've officially convinced me to schedule some guilt-free downtime into my week.
I think we could all benefit from that.
I agree. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, let's recap some of the key takeaways.
Oh, good.
For our listeners, where do we even begin? We covered so much.
Well, I think first and foremost, ditch the lazy label.
Yes.
It's not helpful, and it's often inaccurate.
It's more about understanding those nuances behind our behavior, not just labeling ourselves.
Right, and that leads to the second point, which is get curious about your own patterns.
Okay.
What are the underlying motivations driving your actions or inactions?
So that self-awareness piece is key.
It's like becoming a detective of your own behavior.
I like.
And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works for someone else might not work for you. Experiment with different strategies and be patient with the process.
It's about finding what works for you, not trying to fit into someone else's mold.
Exactly. And lastly, don't forget that technology can be both a help and a hindrance.
Yeah.
So use it strategically to streamline your life, but be mindful of falling into that app overload trap.
Like anything else, moderation is key.
Technology is a tool, not a solution in itself.
Right. If we bring it all together, then conquering laziness is really about conquering ourselves.
I think so.
Understanding our own patterns and creating a life that supports our goals and values.
Well said.
Before we sign off, I have one final question that's been swirling in my mind.
Okay, I'm all ears.
What if instead of trying to eliminate laziness altogether, we embraced it as a signal?
A signal. A signal for what?
A signal that something needs to change.
Yeah.
Maybe our goals are misaligned. Maybe we're burnt out.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to reassess our priorities.
So you're suggesting that laziness could actually be our body and mind's way of telling us to pause and reflect and recalibrate.
Exactly. What if it's not a weakness, but an opportunity for growth and self-discovery?
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It kind of flips the script.
I think it's something worth considering, at least. So the next time you feel that lazy feeling creep in, don't beat yourself up. Listen to what it might be trying to tell you.
That's a great point.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of laziness.
It was my pleasure.
And to you, listener, until next time, stay curious and give yourself permission to rest.